I want to ask you to grab a Bible and open with me to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 11. The name Benedict Arnold is a name that has gone down in infamy. During the American Revolution, Benedict Arnold began as a Continental Army's one of their greatest heroes. He fought bravely at the Battle of Saratoga, and his leadership nearly turned the tide of the war. But beneath the surface, resentment and bitterness began to grow, and he felt underappreciated, overlooked for promotion, and weighed down by debt. And instead of continuing in loyalty, Arnold secretly opened negotiations with the British. His plot was to surrender West Point, one of America's most strategic forts on the Hudson River, in exchange for money and a high position in the British Army. And if the plan had succeeded, the revolution itself might have collapsed. But the scheme was uncovered when a British Major John Andre was captured carrying incriminating documents. Arnold escaped to the British, becoming the most infamous traitor in American history. And the tragedy is this: America didn't nearly lose the war because of the enemies across the ocean, but because of a general within its own camp. The greatest threat wasn't on the outside, it was the enemy within. The story of God's kingdom expanding in ancient Israel and God's chosen king David takes a hard turn in 2 Samuel chapter 11. To this point, the kingdom's been expanding. God has been blessing, and although there were enemies that would attack, God's people had prevailed, and the Lord was with David wherever he went. But now, in 2 Samuel 11, we see a kingdom that's in threat. It could all come crashing down following these moments, but not in the way that you'd think. It's not from a threat of an external enemy. It's from an enemy within. And it's not the person that you would think it would come from. It's in fact the one that you'd least expect, who potentially positions himself as the enemy within, King David himself. Because he's fighting and he's losing a battle to the sin in his own life, to his enemy within. And that's where we pick up the story in 2 Samuel chapter 11. I want to ask you to follow along with me as I read. This is what it says. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" And so David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from uncleanliness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, "I am pregnant." So David sent word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent Uriah to David. And when Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing, and how the people were doing, and how the war was going. And then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet, And Uriah went out of the king's house and followed him, a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and he did not go down to his house. When they told David Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, Why have you not come from a journey? You have come from a journey. Why did you not go down to your house? And Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and his servants of my lord are camping in an open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, Remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And David invited him, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of the Lord, but he did not go down to his house. In the morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And in the letter he wrote, Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him that he may be struck down and die. And as Joab was besieged in the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. Then Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting, and he instructed the messenger, When you have finished telling all the news about the fighting to the king, then if the king's anger rises, and if he says to you, Why did you go so near to the city to fight? Did you not know that they will shoot from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, the son of Jerubasheth? Did not a woman cast an upper millstone on him from the wall, so that he died at Thebez? Why did you go so near to the wall? Then you shall say, Your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. So the messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent to him. And the messenger said to David, The men gained an advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we drove them back to the entrance of the gate. Then the archers shot at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. And David said to the messenger, Thus shall you say to Joab, Do not let this matter displease you, for the sword devours now one and now another. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, and encourage him. And when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Second Samuel moves in and out of detail from broad sweeping accounts to narrow focus. And from time to time, the book focuses on large swaths of time, and at other points it focuses on very narrow sections of time. Some chapters point to the direct nature of God's interaction and his hand, and other chapters focus on the human element. And sometimes there's a lot of focus in dialogue between individuals, and other times the focus is more on the actions of individuals. In this chapter, in chapter 11, we have a very specific style and a specific focus. This chapter is focused on actions. As I read it a minute ago, you probably heard the actions are clear, they're direct, they're intentional. There is little or no deliberation that is explored or motives that are explained. Feelings surrounding them are just simply to be assumed. And the passage, with the terrible story it includes, just leaves us with loads of questions that are unanswered. Questions like, did Bathsheba bait the king into the affair? Was she honored to become one of his wives? Or was she begrudgingly participating? Did Uriah's refusal to go home when he came off the battlefield indicate that he knew something was happening? And there's no explanation to any of these and the many more questions that the text gives, because the focus on this passage is one thing and one thing alone: David's wicked sin. And we see that King David, the magnificent, the godly, the chosen king of God's people, the one who had conquered Goliath, the man after God's very own heart, the one who ruled with justice and equity, the one who had received an eternal covenant, the one whose line would produce the Messiah, the one who has promised a kingdom that will last forever, that guy falls into very serious sin. And we're reminded in this moment that the sin that Adam and Eve first sinned against God marked a turning point for all of their descendants, including David. And now, this sin of David will mark a turning point for all of his descendants in their self-serving nature and rebellion against God. Even the greatest among us are capable of terrible, terrible things. And the narrator highlights David's actions in a very abrupt way, and he does so to warn us from following in this same path. Because how could someone seemingly so close to God become an adulterer and a schemer and even a murderer? Well, it happens one step at a time. We see in verse 2, the first of David's actions. It says that he saw. Simple reality, while David was on the rooftop in the cool of the day, he saw a beautiful woman bathing. I don't think we should assume that Bathsheba was doing anything indecent. She was probably acting in the privacy of her abode, and David, having the vantage point of the palace far above all the other buildings in the city, could look down and see something that nobody else could. Temptation doesn't always begin with our eyes, but it often does. David should have looked away quickly and moved on, but he didn't. He allowed desire to start to take root. Jesus talks about this in Matthew chapter 6, verse 22 and 23. He says, "The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness." So the question for you is, are your eyes healthy? Are you looking at things that fill your body with light? Or are you looking at things that will fill your body with darkness? It might seem innocent enough at first, but what you look at can very quickly lead you down a wrong path. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources reports that more than 17,000 deer die each year after being struck by motorists on state highways in Illinois. And according to a state wildlife director, the peak season for roadkills is in late fall. Why? Because the bucks are in rut in November. They have a single focus for their concentration. The one thing that they're looking at are those female does. And as a result, they're a lot less focused on what's going on around them, even to the point of their own death. Turns out deer aren't the only ones destroyed by a preoccupation with sex. Secondly, we see that David inquired. Verse 3, he sent and he inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David didn't look away. He didn't forget and move on. He let his sin use his mind as a playground. Discipline was required here in the moment, but instead he was fixated on the desire, so he took the next step. He inquired. And the answer that came back to him should have warned him off in all kinds of ways. The name Bathsheba means daughter of an oath. And what was about to happen shows the opposite of keeping an oath for David or for the woman alike. Secondly, he learns that Bathsheba is the daughter of Eliam. And it's assumed that Eliam is the son of Ahithophel, making him one of David's mighty men, a family close to the king's court. Bathsheba was the granddaughter of one of David's counselors. That should have been a red flag. And lastly, she's described as the wife of Uriah the Hittite. She was a married woman. Now, if all the other signs to flee the situation weren't enough, this one always is. Friends, the same is true for you. Don't pursue relationships with someone who is committed in marriage. You enter sin, you cause them to enter sin in the same way. And David at this point knew the 10 commandments of God, which includes in the 10th commandment, "You shall not covet your neighbor's wife." But now he had crossed the threshold from temptation into the sin of coveting. You see, this is just a couple of the easy steps. Doesn't take much to look, to fixate, to inquire, and it's already walking him down the road to a very severe place. And then verse 4 contains 3 actions very quickly together. Look at it with me. So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanliness, and then she returned to her house. He sent the messengers on behalf of the king, and they came back with them to the place. He took her, pointing to the decisiveness and the forcefulness of his actions. He had refused to be a king who takes power or to take the throne to this point, and now here he takes something that is not his. And finally it says he lay with her. He had sinned up to this point, but there was still a way out. He didn't have to complete the actions, but step after step had brought him here. He was blind to the consequence, and now he committed adultery. The 10th commandment says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's wife." The 7th commandment says, "You shall not commit adultery." And the book of James in the New Testament helps us to see how this happens for a person like David and how it happens for a person like me or a person like you. James 1:14 says, "But when each person is tempted, He is lured and enticed by his own desire. And then desire, when it conceives, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. Paul Tripp uses the following scenario to describe what it's like every time a person goes on choosing to lust with a member of the opposite sex. He says a man is walking home from work, lusting after the woman who's approaching him on the sidewalk. He slows down his walk to get a longer look. And he turns around and he watches as she passes. Think with me again the godlike posture of the man. First, he is treating this moment as if it belongs to him. It's as if he is sovereign and she is on the sidewalk according to his will and for his pleasure. He's the self-appointed deity of the moment. The world has shrunk to the size of the man's desire, and he rules it for his own pleasure. He will have what he will have, even if it is only the right to stare at body parts and imagine having them for his pleasure. But there's more. At that moment, he is stealing God's creation and taking it as his own. He has no right to the woman. She does not actually belong to him in any way, but he takes her with his mind and with his eyes. He's ripped this woman out of the hands of God and claimed her as his very own for whatever momentary pleasure he can achieve. He has denied, without knowing it, God's existence and has set himself up as God. We see the pointed result in verse 5. The woman conceived, and she sent and she told David, I'm pregnant. There's no shortage of irony here. Bathsheba, the daughter of an oath, was breaking the oath with her husband as the king, who is also the covenant receiver from God, is breaking his oath with God. The woman was seen as pleasing the Lord by following the purification laws, following her monthly cycle, in bathing, and then only turns around to break the very law of the Lord that she's trying to please. The king, the man after God's own heart, pursues the heart of another, and the king who rules with justice and equity unjustly takes what is not his by taking his neighbor's wife. And while the soldiers are out to battle with the foreign nations, the real battle for the heart and the security of the nation is happening with an enemy that is within. And if King David, the closest, the greatest, the most noble of all the kings, can fall this far, so can I. And so can you. And so at this point, what is he supposed to do? Well, the right thing to do, of course, would be to confess his sin to the Lord and to Uriah, the woman's husband, and to take on the consequences of those sins. Listen, it's always better to confess quickly. When sin is brought into the light, the opportunity for forgiveness exists and healthy resolution can come, but when it remains in the darkness, it only attempts to take a deeper grip on the person who commits it, and the situation turns from bad to worse. Now, you might not always feel like it's going to turn from bad to worse, which is why you convince yourself that it's just better to ignore it or cover it up. But it does turn from bad to worse. Proverbs 28:13 says, "Whoever conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy." David did what many of us try to do. Rather than come clean, he tries to cover it up. Now imagine with me that there is a little boy who isn't getting his way with his parents. And in a fit of rage, he storms out of his house and he disappears into the yard for a while. And a few hours later, his parents come out and they find that someone had taken a sharp object and had carved something into the paint on the hood of their car parked in the driveway. And they questioned the boy if he had done it. "No, it couldn't have been me," said little Danny. "I was in the backyard in the woods playing by myself." And so they questioned again. "It must have been my brother or my sister," Danny said. "I saw them playing in the driveway. They were in the front yard. It must have been them." And the parents waited a little while, but yet they persisted. "I don't even know how to carve things into paint. I don't know what I'd use, and I don't know how to do it," Danny exclaimed. He held his ground. He held firm. He thought the cover-up would hold, but the parents just wouldn't let it go. Why? Well, because the thing carved right into the middle of the hood was his initials. D.O. Dan Osborne. We fool ourselves into thinking that the cover-up will work. And sometimes the cover-up actually leads to something that's worse than the original crime. And so verses 6 through 12 tell us about David's 3 attempts at a cover-up. He recalls Uriah from the battlefield. He gives a report, asks for a report of how Joab and the men are doing. And then in verse 8 he says to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. That's the first attempt at the cover-up. If Uriah's been away and he goes home, he will certainly lay with his wife, and it will be assumed that her pregnancy is with his child. But the deception doesn't go according to plan. Uriah doesn't go home. Instead, he sleeps with the servants at the king's doorway, and when he's asked about it, he says, "The ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of the Lord are camping in an open field. Shall then I go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing." The honorable man does the honorable thing. He wants to please the Lord, and he wants to honor the men on his brief trip rather than to seek pleasure in the comforts of his house and his bride. And so, there comes a second attempt at the cover-up. David devises a plan. Get him drunk and send him home. That'll do it. He invited him, verse 13, and he ate in his presence and he drank so that he made him drunk. And in the evening, he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his Lord, but he did not go down to his house. Well, it was clear that Uriah was a man of principle, and there would be no way to trick him into the cover-up. And so there was only one more option: to try to hide the sin. Now, to be clear, he still could have come clean at this point, King David. There was a better option still on the table. He could have brought this into the light. But the power of sin is strong, and its effect is blinding on the one who's submitted to it. Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?" And so David sends word to the general Joab. Verse 15, in the letter he wrote, "Send Uriah into the forefront of the hardest fighting and then draw back from him that he may be struck down and die." And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. And Uriah the Hittite also died. The plan worked. David must have been so relieved. And his relief was a sign that he had become morally bankrupt. The message returns to him with the good news, and he tells the servant to tell Joab, "Do not let the matter displease you, for the sword devours one now and now another. Strengthen your attack to the city and overthrow it." The murder of Uriah and even the death of those around him had become acceptable to the king. The one who was supposed to discern the difference between good and evil had perpetrated an act of great evil and told his general to feel okay about it. He was supposed to lead the defense against Israel, or for Israel, and now he was taking the sword to his own people. The 10th commandment says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's wife." The 7th commandment says, "You shall not commit adultery." And the 6th commandment says, "You shall not murder." And now David had done all three. And how did he get here? It started with a look, and then an inquiry, and then a sequence of actions. And Jesus speaks about how sin puts us in this position. He says in Mark chapter 7, "For from within, out of the heart of a man come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, and adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." And again, while the soldiers are out on the battlefield, contending for the nation, the real enemy is within. So here's the result. In 2 Samuel 11:26 and 27, we see the end of this first half of the tragic story. It says, "When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David had sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord." The thing displeased the Lord. And so what are you to take away from this? The story's not over, and we will continue it down the road. But the obvious answer is to understand who and what your greatest enemy in this life actually is. Sin is a greater threat to you than people who would seek to harm you physically. Sin's a greater threat to you than circumstances that are really bad or uncomfortable for you, or even a greater threat to you than disease that can kill you. You read a story like this and you say, "I could never do anything like that." But that very same human nature and that very same infected heart, that same sinful desire, that same blindness to where it takes you, that same desire to cover it up and to avoid the consequences exists in me and it exists in you. And God is displeased when we give into it. Sin is sin, wrong is wrong, right is right. We need someone to deal with the enemy within us. We need someone to give us a different heart than the heart of wickedness. We need someone who can cover our sin, because us covering it up doesn't work. We need Jesus. He's the only one who can. We don't need to cover up because he takes the sin as his own. He pays the penalty for it, and in that sense, it becomes covered from us forever. And the story of David isn't over. We'll explore it more when we get to 2 Samuel 12, but suffice it to say, God is displeased with the one that he's just also made an eternal promise to. How is that going to become reconciled? How are the two realities of someone who is an adulterer, a coveter, and a murderer, and yet God has made him the chosen king of the nation, how is God going to bring that together? When we read this account, I'm tempted to think that this must be the lowest point in the history of the Old Testament. But you know what? When you take a big picture look, it's actually like one of the highest. David's the best king that Israel has ever had and ever will have. The nation is healthier at this point than it's ever been before. They're defeating their enemies in battle because of the Lord's presence among them in a way they hadn't previously completely enjoyed. And if God's chosen king, the one after his own heart, the one who has conquered Goliath and been given the eternal covenant, if that guy can fall into grave sin, what does it say about the rest of humanity? We see that the kingdom of God is not safe, even with the most noble of earthly kings. This kingdom is not safe from the enemy within. Israel needs a better king. And we need a better king. A sinless king. A king who can redeem sinners, conquer the devil, display complete divine authority in true purity and justice and equity. We need King Jesus. And the promise of God to David is that one from his line would come and carry on the kingdom forever. We need King Jesus. And thanks be to God that we have him. Let's pray. Father, help us by the power of your Spirit to resist the look, the inquiry, the actions that lead us down to the depths of sin. Lord, help us to understand that, but by the grace of God, so go I into the darkest of places. Help us to appreciate, to long for, to love the true and lasting King Jesus that's come. Because we need a better king. We need King Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.